It all started with a call. A simple call, one that most people would ignore or dismiss, thinking it was just another piece of paperwork or a nuisance. But for me, it was the beginning of something I never could have imagined. I remember the day so clearly. It was the first Monday after my father's funeral, a cold winter morning with the kind of quiet that only follows the death of someone you thought you knew completely. I had spent the last few days processing grief, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in the absence of his presence. The house felt too quiet, the spaces too empty. I tried to bury myself in the mundane: laundry, cleaning, paying bills, anything that would keep me busy, anything that would make the time move faster. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping lukewarm coffee, when the phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but I picked it up anyway. It was a woman's voice on the other end, calm and professional. "Hello, Mrs. Harper? This is Lauren from the estate firm. I'm calling regarding your father's estate. We have some documents that need to be finalized. Is now a good time to talk?" I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. "Sure, what's this about?" "We're in the final stages of processing the will. There are a few matters that require your attention. It's best if we meet in person. There's something we need to go over regarding the assets." Assets. The word hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea what she was talking about. My father was never the type to flaunt wealth, never the type to talk about money. He was always humble, always concerned about keeping things simple, about not making a fuss. As far as I knew, we were getting by. The house was old, yes, but it was paid off. He had a modest retirement, and there was a life insurance policy that would help cover the funeral costs. There wasn't much more than that. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask the concern creeping into my voice. "I mean, what do you mean by assets?" "Mrs. Harper," she said gently, "I think it's best if we discuss this in person. It's complicated. Would you be able to come by our office this afternoon?" Complicated. The words settled uneasily in my stomach, but I agreed to meet her. I had no idea what I was walking into, but something about the way she said it, like she was holding back, like there was more to the story, made my heart race. The office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place you only go when something serious is at stake. I walked in, my heels clicking sharply against the polished floors. A young woman at the front desk directed me to a small conference room in the back. Lauren greeted me with a warm smile, though I could tell something was off. Her eyes kept flicking toward a stack of papers on the table between us, as though she wasn't sure how to begin. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Harper," her tone polite but distant. "Please, take a seat." I did, my curiosity growing with every second. There was a heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't shake. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. Lauren cleared her throat, her fingers hovering over the stack of papers before her. She looked at me, then down at the documents, then back at me. "I'm not sure how to say this, but your father, he wasn't as financially modest as you might have thought." My heart stopped for a moment. "What do you mean?" "Your father," he paused, her lips pressing together, "was a millionaire." The words landed like a punch in my chest, $1 million punch, one that left me breathless, speechless. I couldn't process what she was saying. The man I'd known, the one who lived a life of simplicity, who never cared about appearances, never spent beyond his means, a millionaire? It didn't make sense. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, shaking my head. "My father, he didn't have that kind of money. He wasn't that kind of man." Lauren didn't flinch. She opened the folder in front of her and slid a set of documents toward me. "Your father invested wisely over the years. He had stocks, real estate, and several business ventures that he kept private. The total value of his assets comes to a little over $8 million. $8 million. The number seemed impossible. I picked up the documents and scanned them, my hands trembling. There were accounts I didn't recognize, properties I'd never known about, investments hidden in plain sight. My father had lived a quiet life, one where money didn't matter, or so I thought. But now, in the sterile light of the office, all I could see was the truth I never knew. How could he hide all of this? I asked, my voice breaking. How did I never know? Lauren looked at me with a kind of understanding. He didn't want anyone to know. He kept it all private. He believed that wealth was a burden, and he didn't want it to define his relationships, especially with you. He didn't want his success to take away from the life you had together. He wanted you to remember him for who he was, not for what he had. Tears welled up in my eyes as I sat back in my chair. It was too much to take in, too much to understand. I had just buried him, and now I'm finding out that everything I thought I knew about him was a lie. He had carried this secret with him all these years, keeping it to himself, even from his family. Why? Why had he hidden it? Why hadn't he told me? The silence between us stretched on. The room felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't look at the papers anymore. I couldn't look at her. All I could do was try to grasp onto something familiar, something real. Lauren broke the silence. "There's more, Mrs. Harper. It's not just the money that's important. It's what he wanted to do with it." I could feel my heart racing in my chest. The words were still ringing in my ears. "There's more." Those two words seemed to echo in my mind, each syllable pressing harder against my consciousness. Lauren cleared her throat again and pushed another set of papers toward me. She noticed my hesitation but didn't rush me. I wasn't sure I could take in any more information, but I reached for the documents, my hands still trembling. She waited patiently as I scanned the contents of the papers in front of me. These were different. These weren't financial statements or real estate listings. These were plans, blueprints. It was as if my father had been working on this in secret, carefully arranging the details of his estate in a way that ensured his wishes would be followed, even when he was no longer here to explain them. "Your father," Lauren continued, "had a very specific plan for what he wanted to do with his wealth. He didn't want it to go to waste. He didn't want it to go to anyone who would squander it. He wanted it to be used for things that mattered." I didn't know what I was expecting, but this wasn't it. My father, the man who always told me money wasn't the most important thing in life, had carefully curated a legacy. He had created a blueprint for what he wanted his wealth to accomplish. And now here I was, seeing it for the first time, completely blindsided. "Let me explain," Lauren said softly, as though sensing the flood of questions rushing through my mind. "Your father wanted to leave a portion of his estate to organizations that he believed were doing important work. He had a particular passion for education, for supporting underprivileged children. He had also set up an anonymous fund for cancer research in honor of his own sister who passed away a few years ago. But there's more. More. My mind reeled at the enormity of it all. I was still struggling to understand the concept of my father being wealthy, but now I was faced with the revelation that he had been quietly, almost silently, investing in causes that mattered to him. He hadn't wanted to broadcast his generosity. He hadn't wanted to seek praise or acknowledgement. It was the kind of generosity that was hidden, purposeful, and impactful. Your father wanted you to have a say in how his legacy would unfold. He knew that you were capable of carrying out his vision, but there's one thing you need to understand about these plans. They weren't about you inheriting everything. He wanted you to choose. He wanted you to decide which causes to continue funding, how to allocate the resources, and which of his investments to carry forward. I sat there, speechless. The weight of what she was saying settled in like a heavy fog. My father hadn't just left me a monetary inheritance. He had left me with a responsibility to carry out his vision, to honor his memory in ways that went beyond material wealth. My heart ached as I thought about how little I had truly known him. He had been more than just a father. He had been a man with principles, with purpose, and with an unwavering sense of responsibility to the world around him. "But why didn't he tell me?" I asked, my voice trembling with the frustration I had been holding inside since the moment Lauren had uttered those first words. Why didn't he ever mention this? Why didn't he let me in on any of it? Lauren paused, then gently placed a hand on the table between us. "He didn't want to burden you. He didn't want you to feel obligated to live up to his expectations. He wanted you to live your life freely, but he knew that when the time came, you'd be the one who could carry on the work. He trusted you with this. I felt a lump rise in my throat, and I had to look away, staring out the window at the gray sky. My father had trusted me. He had known that one day I would understand, even if it was too late for him to explain. He had left me a legacy I wasn't prepared for. I had no idea how to manage it, how to fulfill his vision. I don't know if I can do this, I whispered, more to myself than to Lauren. You don't have to do it alone. There's support. There's a team of people who've worked with your father for years. They're ready to help you. But it's going to take time. It's going to be difficult. But this is your father's wish. I sat there trying to absorb it all, trying to make sense of the man I thought I knew, and the stranger who had quietly planned all of this behind closed doors. How could he have hidden something so monumental? How could he have kept this part of himself locked away from us, from me? I looked back down at the papers Lauren had laid out before me. The weight of them felt heavier now, not because of their financial value, but because of the responsibility they carried. I had no choice but to accept what was left behind. My father knew what he was doing. He knew that one day I would sit here and feel lost in the magnitude of it all. I don't know where to start, I said, my voice cracking. Lauren smiled kindly. We'll start with what your father wanted you to do. He knew you would have doubts, but he believed in you. The tears that had been welling up in my eyes finally fell. I had always known my father loved me, but now I understood just how much he believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. I had spent my whole life thinking I knew everything about him, but now I realized how much more there was to discover. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about legacy. This was about carrying on the work my father had started in the quietest, most profound way possible. And I was terrified, but I was also determined. It's funny how you can live your whole life with someone and still not know who they really are. It's like a puzzle where all the pieces are there, but you don't understand the picture until it's too late. I spent so many years thinking I knew my father. I knew his habits, his likes, his dislikes, how he took his coffee, what kind of music he preferred on long drives. But this new revelation, the life he had carefully built and kept hidden from everyone, it shattered the image I had of him. I wasn't sure how to process all of it. I wasn't even sure where to start. The weight of responsibility was heavy. I had to carry out his wishes, manage millions of dollars, support organizations he believed in, and keep everything he'd worked for intact. It was a far cry from the simple life he'd shown me. In those quiet moments we had together, I never saw the magnitude of his life beyond what was right in front of me. He had always been so careful not to show off, so private about his wealth, that now, even as I sat in the middle of it all, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The following week, I met with some of the people my father had worked with, financial advisors, business partners, nonprofit leaders. They had known him in ways I hadn't. They spoke with reverence when they mentioned his name. I felt like an outsider in my own father's world. Every time they spoke about his generosity, his wisdom, his careful planning, it was as if they were describing a man I barely recognized. We've always admired your father's approach to wealth, one of his business partners said to me one afternoon as we sat in a small, dimly lit conference room. He was never in it for the money. It was always about the impact. He believed that success came from helping others, not from accumulating wealth for the sake of it. I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. I had been living in my father's shadow my whole life, but now it felt like I was being asked to step into his shoes, the shoes of a man who had quietly shaped his world and left behind an intricate legacy, one I had no idea how to navigate. The partners continued, but I didn't hear much of what they said after that. The words began to blur into the background as I thought about what this all meant. Was I ready for this? Was I ready to carry this weight, to take on the responsibility he had entrusted to me, even though he had never prepared me for it? By the time I left the meeting, the only thing I knew for sure was that I was completely unprepared. I was drowning in a sea of financial reports, charity proposals, and legal documents that made no sense to me. I had no background in any of this. I had never been involved in my father's business dealings. I had never asked questions about his investments. I simply trusted him, trusted that he had everything under control, trusted that he was the steady, reliable man he had always been. And now that trust was being tested in ways I couldn't have imagined. When I returned home that evening, I collapsed onto the couch, completely drained. The house felt too quiet. Even the walls seemed to be pressing in on me, echoing my exhaustion. I had never felt more alone. My phone buzzed with notifications, emails from lawyers, investors, and charity directors, all with something urgent they needed my attention on. It was all too much. I stared at the blank TV screen, my mind spinning. How had my father done this? How had he kept all of this from me, from all of us? Why had he kept his wealth a secret, kept his vision hidden? I knew the answer, of course. He didn't want to burden me. He didn't want to make me feel obligated to follow in his footsteps. But now, here I was, standing in the very life he had built, and I had no idea what to do with it. I reached for the envelope Lauren had given me, the one that contained all of my father's final wishes. It felt like the last tether connecting me to him, the last piece of advice he had left for me. I tore it open, reading the first line aloud to myself. I want you to live your life without the weight of my wealth or expectations. It was a comfort, but it also made everything more complicated. He wanted me to live freely, but I couldn't ignore the legacy he had left behind. His wealth wasn't just money. It was responsibility. It was opportunity. It was the chance to do something significant with everything he had worked for. But it wasn't just about doing it for him. It was about doing it for me, too. I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of legacy I wanted to build on my own. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be fast, but I had to start somewhere. In the weeks that followed, I began to piece together a plan. I reached out to the organizations my father had supported, the causes he cared so deeply about. I met with people who had worked alongside him, learning more about the projects he had funded, the businesses he had invested in, and the lives he had touched. Slowly, I started to understand the depth of his impact. He had given so much of himself, and now it was my turn to carry that forward. But with every new piece of information I uncovered, with every new responsibility I inherited, the weight grew heavier. I was beginning to realize that the legacy my father had left behind wasn't just something I had to manage. It was something I had to own, something I had to live. I spent sleepless nights poring over documents, reading through my father's letters, trying to piece together the puzzle of his life. Each letter, each signature, each decision, it all carried a weight. I wasn't just inheriting wealth. I was inheriting his dreams, his ambitions, his failures, his triumphs. And I wasn't sure I was ready for all of it. But I didn't have a choice. I thought for a brief moment that I could keep everything in motion, that I could manage the wealth, the projects, the people, and somehow make it all work without really understanding what I was doing. After all, my father had done it for years without breaking a sweat. He had been the steady hand, the calm presence, the one everyone turned to when things got complicated. And yet, here I was, trying to find my footing while carrying the burden of his life's work. It didn't take long before the first obstacle appeared. I was at a meeting with a group of nonprofit directors who had been working with my father for years. They had all known him well, had seen firsthand the impact of his philanthropy, and had become accustomed to the way he operated, quietly, efficiently, with a steady stream of funding that they had learned to rely on. But now that I was in charge, they weren't sure what to expect. They were polite enough, but there was an undercurrent of hesitation in the room. I could see it in their eyes. They were waiting for me to crack. They were waiting to see if I would be the same kind of leader my father had been, or if I would fall short. The meeting started out simple enough, with introductions and updates on ongoing projects. They spoke about the schools my father had funded, the scholarships he had established, and the research grants he had provided. But it wasn't long before the conversation turned to something else, something that was far more difficult to navigate. "We've been doing some planning for the next phase of the project," Emily said, her voice measured, "and we wanted to discuss the allocation of the next round of funding. Your father had always been clear about his commitment to these initiatives. We just need to know what direction you're thinking for the future." I felt the pressure mounting in my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about continuing the work my father had started, about keeping his vision alive. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready for the weight of their expectations, the expectation that I would be able to step into his shoes without hesitation. I I'm still reviewing everything, I stammered, trying to steady my voice. I need time to go through the plans, to understand what my father's priorities were in more detail. I want to make sure we're aligned before we make any big decisions. Emily's expression didn't change, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. Of course, we understand that, but time is a factor. We need to keep the momentum going. If we delay funding, we risk losing some of the partnerships we've developed. We don't want to go backward. Her words stung. The pressure felt suffocating. I was just beginning to grasp the scope of my father's legacy, and now they were telling me that any hesitation on my part could derail everything. "I understand," I said, my voice quieter now, more uncertain than I wanted it to be. "I'll make sure to review everything as quickly as I can." But inside, I was drowning. How could I keep this up? How could I carry my father's vision forward when I didn't even know if I believed in all of it myself? I was doing this for him, but I hadn't even had the chance to understand what it all meant yet. As the meeting went on, I felt like a fraud. I smiled and nodded, agreed to follow up on certain proposals, promised to meet with more people, but in my mind, I kept returning to one question. Was I the right person for this job? When the meeting finally ended, I made my way back to the office, my thoughts a blur. The weight of the responsibility pressed down harder with each step. I hadn't expected it to be easy, but I hadn't anticipated feeling so utterly overwhelmed so soon. The pressure was relentless. I had to keep up the momentum. I had to prove I was capable. But how could I prove anything when I didn't even know where to begin? I sat down at my desk and stared at the piles of papers in front of me. It all felt like too much information, too many decisions to make, too many people relying on me to get it right. And yet, here I was, still fumbling through the first few days of this new life, unsure if I was even remotely prepared for it. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of my father's old colleagues, someone I hadn't met yet, but who had been working closely with him on a major project. The message was short, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. "We need to talk. I've tried reaching out a few times, but I'm not sure if you're aware of some of the complications your father was dealing with on this project. The financial backing is at risk. We need immediate clarification." The words were simple, but they carried a weight far heavier than anything I had encountered yet. Financial backing at risk? Complications? What kind of complications had my father been involved in that I didn't know about? And why hadn't he prepared me for this? I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing mind. I needed to handle this, whatever it was. I had no choice. I couldn't let my father's work fall apart. I couldn't let everything he had built be undone because I didn't know what I was doing. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I didn't have the luxury of time. I couldn't keep hesitating, couldn't keep questioning myself. If I was going to fulfill this role, I had to do it with conviction, even if I didn't have all the answers. I had to learn quickly. I had to figure out what my father had been dealing with and take control of the situation before it slipped beyond my reach. I stood up, made the call to his colleague, and braced myself for what I might hear. But even as I dialed, I knew one thing for certain. There was no going back now. This was my path. This was my responsibility. Whether I was ready or not, I had to face it. I was unprepared for the call. I had hoped for answers, for something that would give me a sense of control. But when I heard the voice on the other end, it only deepened the confusion, the uncertainty that already weighed so heavily on my shoulders. "Mrs. Harper," the man said, his voice tight with tension, "I've been trying to reach you for days. I need to explain the situation about the project your father was involved in. There are things you need to know." His tone wasn't calm. It was urgent, filled with an undercurrent of panic. I could feel my chest tighten, my pulse quickening. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What kind of situation?" "There's a financial gap," he said quickly. "Your father had promised a significant investment in a major real estate development project, something he was deeply committed to. But the timing, it's complicated." "Complicated how?" I pressed, barely able to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean, financial gap?" "I don't know all the details," he replied, his frustration palpable. "But I do know that your father was struggling with securing the final round of funding. He had secured most of it, but he was facing some challenges with the investors. The project is at risk, Mrs. Harper. If we don't act fast, we could lose everything." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. A financial gap? A major real estate project? This was not what I had expected to hear. My father had always been so careful, so deliberate in everything he did. How had I not known about this? How had he hidden it from me? Even as his only daughter, the one person he had trusted above all else. I don't understand," I stammered. "Why wasn't I told about this? Why didn't my father prepare me for something this big?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when he spoke again, his voice softened, almost apologetically. "Mrs. Harper, I'm sure your father didn't want to burden you with this. He didn't want to worry you. But the truth is, he had gotten very close to finalizing everything before his passing. We were almost there. But now, without his signature and without a clear decision on how to proceed, the whole project is in jeopardy." I felt my stomach churn. In jeopardy. The weight of it hit me like a brick. What kind of person had my father been to get involved in something like this? Why hadn't he trusted me with the details? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. What can I do to fix this? How can I help? He sighed, as though he had been waiting for that question. "You need to make a decision. The investors are waiting. The next move is yours, Mrs. Harper." The next move was mine. That was what he had said. I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to face the mess my father had left behind. "I need time to think," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll be in touch." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking as I sat there, staring at the walls around me. The realization of what was happening slowly began to sink in. My father, the man who had always been steady, had been caught up in something far bigger than I had known. And now, I was left to deal with the consequences. I felt lost, completely and utterly lost. How could I have missed all of this? How had I been so oblivious to the struggles he had been facing? It seemed impossible. It was as if I had been living in a bubble, thinking everything was fine, and now the bubble had burst, leaving me standing in the ruins. But this wasn't just about money or real estate projects. It was about trust, about the secrets my father had kept from me, about the fact that he had shielded me from the reality of his life, the very life he had been building in silence. And now, I had to pick up the pieces. I spent the rest of the day trying to wrap my mind around it. I reached out to the legal team, the financial advisors, trying to understand what had been going on behind the scenes. The more I uncovered, the more complicated everything seemed. It was as if my father had been living in two worlds, the one I knew and the one I had no idea about. The project, it turned out, wasn't just any real estate deal. It was a development that had the potential to change the landscape of the city. It was risky, yes, but it had the potential for enormous returns. My father believed in it. He had invested heavily in it. But now, without his signature and without a clear decision on how to proceed, the whole project is in jeopardy. The weight of it all pressed down on me as I sat at my desk, going over the figures, trying to make sense of it. I didn't have the experience. I didn't know the ins and outs of real estate deals or investment strategies. How was I supposed to make these decisions? How was I supposed to pick up where my father had left off? And then it hit me. I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't fix everything by myself. I needed help. I needed someone who knew what they were doing, someone who could guide me through this. I reached for the phone again, this time calling the one person I thought might be able to help, my father's longtime friend and business partner, Mark. The phone rang several times before Mark answered. I had always known him to be a calm, measured man, someone who had been a fixture in my father's life for as long as I could remember. He was one of the few people my father truly trusted, a steady presence in the chaos of his business dealings. I had hoped that reaching out to him would give me the guidance I so desperately needed, the answers to the questions I was drowning in. "Hello, Emma," Mark said when he picked up. His voice was warm but strained, as if he knew exactly what I was about to ask. "Mark, I need your help," I began, feeling a lump form in my throat. "There's this project, my father's real estate investment, and it's in jeopardy. I don't know what to do. He left me everything, but I'm not sure how to handle it. I don't know where to even start." There was a pause on the other end. Then Mark sighed heavily, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "I've been expecting your call," he said softly. "Listen, Emma, I think it's time you knew the full truth about what your father was involved in." The words sent a chill through me. "What do you mean? What truth?" "You need to understand that the project your father was involved in wasn't just about the real estate. It was bigger than that. Much bigger," Mark said. "This project, this whole thing, it's been under the radar for a long time. Your father, well, he wasn't just the investor. He was the key player in something that, frankly, I'm not sure you're prepared to hear about." My stomach dropped. What was he talking about? My father had always been so straightforward with me. He had never been one to hide things, at least not in a way that would make me feel like I didn't know him. "What do you mean, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What wasn't he telling me?" "I should have told you this sooner, Emma," Mark said, his voice filled with regret. "But I thought it was something your father should handle, not me. I didn't want to complicate things. He was involved in a high-risk venture that involved not just money, but connections, dangerous connections. There were people he was working with who weren't entirely legal. This project, this whole thing, it's been under the radar for a long time. Your father, well, he wasn't just the investor. He was the key player in something that, frankly, I'm not sure you're prepared to hear about." My stomach dropped. What was he talking about? My father had always been so straightforward with me. He had never been one to hide things, at least not in a way that would make me feel like I didn't know him. "What do you mean, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What wasn't he telling me?" "I should have told you this sooner, Emma," Mark said, his voice filled with regret. "But I thought it was something your father should handle, not me. I didn't want to complicate things. He was involved in a high-risk venture that involved not just money, but connections, dangerous connections. There were people he was working with who weren't entirely legal. This project, this whole thing, it's been under the radar for a long time. Your father, well, he wasn't just the investor. He was the key player in something that, frankly, I'm not sure you're prepared to hear about." My stomach dropped. What was he talking about? My father had always been so straightforward with me. He had never been one to hide things, at least not in a way that would make me feel like I didn't know him. "What do you mean, Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What wasn't he telling me?" "I'm not lying," Mark interrupted, his voice suddenly cold. "I wish I was. I wish I could say your father was just caught up in bad investments or bad luck. But the reality is darker than that, Emma. And now, with him gone, it's all on you." I felt the ground beneath me shift. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. I sank into the chair behind me, unable to process what I was hearing. The man I had loved and admired had been involved in illegal activity? Had he known that it was spiraling out of control, or had he been too deep to get out? "What do I do now?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mark paused, then spoke, his tone softening. "You need to make a choice, Emma. The project can still go forward, but it will take a great deal of work to untangle your father's involvement. You'll need to decide whether you want to continue the project or cut ties completely. But either way, it's going to be messy. And the people who are involved in this, they won't go away quietly. They'll be looking for someone to take your father's place." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. So I'm supposed to take over for him? I don't know anything about this. I don't know how to deal with criminals, Mark. I don't know what to do. "I know this is a lot, Emma," Mark said, his voice more compassionate now. "But you're going to have to decide. You can't pretend it isn't there. You have to face it head on. If you want to salvage what your father worked for, you're going to need help. There are people who can guide you, but you have to be willing to make tough choices." The line between what was right and what was necessary blurred in that moment. The legacy my father had left me was no longer just about wealth or good intentions. It was about survival. It was about navigating a world that I had never been prepared for, one that was dark and dangerous, and yet somehow still tethered to the life he had built. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know if I can be the person my father wanted me to be." Mark's response was quiet but firm. "You don't have a choice, Emma. This is your legacy now." The line went silent for a moment, and then Mark added one last thing. "I'll be here to help you however I can, but you need to decide quickly. Time is running out." As the call ended, I sat in the silence of the room, the weight of his words settling heavily on my chest. I wasn't just carrying my father's wealth, I was carrying his secrets, his mistakes, his risks, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for any of it. Sleep stopped visiting me after that call. Nights stretched endlessly, the ceiling above me turning into a screen where memories replayed themselves without mercy. My father laughing at the kitchen table, my father fixing a loose cabinet hinge, my father telling me that no amount of money was worth losing your peace. I laughed bitterly into the dark. Peace, if only you knew what you left me. During the day, I functioned on autopilot. I answered emails, I signed documents I barely understood. I smiled at people who spoke about my father with admiration, unaware of the shadow now attached to his name. Every compliment felt sharp, every kind word cut deeper. The pressure escalated quickly. Two men showed up at my office one afternoon, unannounced. They were polite, too polite. Expensive suits, easy smiles, eyes that never stopped measuring the room. They introduced themselves as associates tied to the development project. "We just want to ensure continuity," one of them said, folding his hands neatly on the table. "Your father was essential." The word essential landed wrong. "I'm still reviewing all outstanding commitments," I replied, choosing each word carefully. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "Nothing will move forward until everything is transparent." They exchanged a glance. "Transparency can be flexible," the other man said with a small smile. "Your father understood that." Something inside me snapped into place. "No," I said quietly, "he didn't." The room cooled instantly. When they left, my legs gave out. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, breath coming in uneven gasps. I cried then, openly, the sound raw and uncontained. I pressed my palm against my mouth, laughing through tears, because the absurdity of it all felt unbearable. If only you knew what you left me. That night, I called my husband and told him everything. I hadn't meant to keep it from him this long, I just hadn't known how to say it out loud. He listened in silence. When he finished, he exhaled slowly. "We'll get through this, but you need to stop protecting a ghost." Those words stayed with me. I met with lawyers the next morning, not the ones my father had used, new ones, aggressive ones, the kind who asked hard questions and didn't flinch at ugly answers. They laid it out plainly. "You can walk away. Cooperate fully, expose everything. It will be painful, public, but it will end this. And the alternative? They didn't sugarcoat it. Continuing means risk. Legal, financial, personal. And once you step in, stepping out becomes very difficult. I thought about my father again, about how tired he must have been, about the weight he carried alone, about how he had shielded me from all of this, even when it was consuming him. I understood then. This was the choice he never had the courage or the timing to make. I went home and sat at the kitchen table until sunset bled into night. My hands rested on the wood, grounding me. This house, this life, my marriage, none of it was worth sacrificing for money that had already cost too much. I called Mark. I'm ending it, all of it. There was silence on the other end. That's going to anger some people, he said carefully. I know. You could lose everything. I already almost did, I replied. The next weeks were brutal. Investigations, headlines, whispers that followed me into grocery stores and doctors' offices. People speculated. Some defended my father. Others condemned him. I didn't read most of it. I focused on what was in front of me. I cooperated fully. Funds were frozen, projects halted, the development collapsed under scrutiny. The men in suits disappeared as quickly as they had arrived. What remained was quieter, heavier, cleaner. One evening, months later, I stood in the backyard watching my husband grill dinner. The smell of smoke and food filled the air. Something ordinary, something real. I cried then, softly, without warning. He came over and held me while I laughed through it, shaking my head at myself. I never wanted any of this. I know, he said, but you ended it. I thought about my father that night, not with anger, not with confusion, but with clarity. He had been many things, kind, generous, flawed, afraid. I loved him anyway, and I had chosen differently. The world didn't end the way I thought it would. After the investigations, after the articles stopped appearing, after people found a new story to consume, life softened around the edges. Not kinder, just quieter. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts again. Most of the money vanished. Frozen accounts, legal settlements, restitution. The number everyone had obsessed over shrank into something abstract, then irrelevant. I watched it happen without panic, without regret. It surprised even me. What remained was enough to live, enough to breathe, enough to sleep at night. That mattered more than millions ever could. I visited my father's grave again when the dust finally settled. This time, I didn't bring anger with me. I brought questions that no longer needed answers. I know why you did it, I said aloud, kneeling in the grass. I know you thought you were protecting us. My voice broke, and I let it. I cried until my throat hurt, until laughter bubbled up between tears, shaky and incredulous. I saw him more clearly now, not as a hero or a villain, but as a man who made choices and paid for them quietly. A man who believed money could be controlled if his intentions were good enough. He was wrong, but he loved fiercely. That had always been true. At home, my husband and I learned how to be ordinary again. We talked more about fear, about trust, about the kind of future we wanted that didn't involve secrets or silence. One night he asked, "Do you ever wish you'd never found out?" I thought about it. No, because then I would have inherited the lie. We laughed together softly, relief laughter. The kind that comes after surviving something you didn't know how to name while you were inside it. I started volunteering at one of the schools my father had funded years ago, not as a benefactor, as a person. I helped with homework. I listened to stories. I watched kids run across cracked pavement and thought about how impact doesn't require excess, just presence. That felt right. The house felt lighter too, not bigger, just honest. I opened windows more, let air move through rooms that had held too much tension. I stopped worrying about appearances. I stopped trying to protect my father's image. What he left me wasn't wealth. It was a warning and a choice. I chose differently. Months later, I found one last envelope in a drawer I'd already emptied twice. His handwriting, again, uneven, Familiar. If you're reading this, it means you know. I sat on the floor as I read. I didn't hide the money because I was proud of it. I hid it because I was afraid of what it would cost you if you knew too early. My chest tightened. If you're angry, that's fair. If you're disappointed, that's fair too. Just don't let my fear become yours. Tears slid down my face as I laughed softly through them. You always did leave the hardest conversations for last. The shocking secret wasn't that my father was a millionaire. It was that everything he did, good and bad, came from the same place, love mixed with fear. And what he really left me wasn't money. It was the courage to choose truth over comfort and to live without hiding.